Welcome to the Justice in Heels podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Hayward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for season 2. In this season, we focus on sharing stories and exploring strategies that empower those in the legal field to not just survive, but thrive in their careers. So, whether you're a seasoned lawyer, a fresh graduate navigating the legal landscape, or just someone curious about the world of law, Season 2 of this podcast is your go-to source for inspiration and support. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Justice in Heels podcast. Today, I am blessed to have advocate Doris Goodenough with me. Doris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Danielle.
Such a pleasure. So, can you give us a short description of who you are? Tell us a bit more.
Sure. I am an advocate in private practice. I joined the bar in 1990, and I've been practicing mostly in civil litigation, and that is something that I have now several decades of experience with. I have found that there are certain strategies which one can adopt in order to keep one's sanity and look after one's mental health while practicing civil litigation.
Amazing. So I think you already kind of gave a little introduction to what we are going to speak about, which is mental health and well-being in the legal profession. So can you first tell us, when did you start becoming interested in well-being and work-life balance and mental health?
Yes. Well, I had a nervous breakdown in 2013, at the end of 2013. Until then, I had for 20 years been winning court cases, dealing with all the stresses that come with litigation, and I was fine. I thought I was fine, but I wasn't so fine, because what happened was there was a very tragic death in our family. And when that happened, I was already very tired and burnt out. I'm a single mother, and I thought I had been coping, but when that death happened in the family, it was quite obvious that my reserves were so low that I couldn't cope with that. And being already burnt out, very tired and very stressed, I had a nervous breakdown, and for 8 months, I was in a severe depression, and I was absolutely incapable of doing any work. It was so bad that I thought that I wouldn't be able to work ever again. I couldn't look after my daughter. She went to live with her father during that time. And absolutely, by the grace of God and with the help of a wonderful therapist and other professional support, I did recover, and I have now been well, mentally healthy, stable, and happy for more than 10 years. And so I'm very grateful about that.
Amazing. I'm so glad that you healed and that you got the chance to actually recover from that. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Like, I know it's not always easy to share these type of stories, because I think like a lot of people, especially the public, think that legal professionals are these strong, superhuman beings, basically, who can't, like, they don't get sad, they don't get depressed. Some people even believe like legal professionals do not like have hearts, they don't have souls, they're just robots. So I think it's refreshing to hear your story, and refreshing to hear that it is something that happens to all of us, actually. So
it's interesting. Carry on.
No, sorry. Continue
it's
your point.
Interesting that you mentioned that, Danielle, because the statistics prove that we lawyers are not these superhumans who are invincible. We need to project that persona, and obviously nobody wants to go to a tired or a depressed advocate or attorney, of course. And we are in an adversarial world, And we've got to be really tough, and that's got to show. If you look at the statistics, however, you will see a different picture, that the legal profession as a whole, all over the world, is amongst the very highest of people suffering from depression, anxiety, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, suicide. It's really very obvious when you see that, to realize that we are not what we think we should be, and we are not the image that we project. And, you know, because I am so grateful for having made such a full recovery, I would like to pay that forward and share with my colleagues the strategies that I have learned to help me maintain my good mental and physical health, and to actually thrive rather than just coping and always hovering close to burnout, which is what I was doing before my breakdown. Even though I was still working and functioning, I was always either burnt out or very close to it. And, you know, being that exhausted and burnt out means that there's no reserves left for if something terrible happens.
Definitely. So, would you say that most of your clients are younger attorneys? So, let's say, for example, candidate attorneys, or would you say it's the more experienced attorneys who are like, let's say they've been in practice for 10 or 20 years, or whatever? Like, what type of person usually comes to you?
Well, have had clients over the full spectrum, from young candidate attorneys. I have another attorney who sees me who's been in practice for more than 20 years, and also people in between. So I think that it's not really to do with how much experience they have in the profession. It's about, I think the biggest determining factor is when a person, a legal practitioner, is sufficiently aware of their own emotions and their own levels of energy to know that they need help. You know, the people who come to me realize that they can benefit from having someone in the profession who can relate to what they're saying, relate to their experiences, that perhaps a professional person such as a psychologist or psychiatrist couldn't, because they are not in law. And I'm certainly not suggesting that people should see me instead of a psychologist or psychiatrist. What I'm saying is that what my contribution is that I can totally relate, because I have for more than 30 years also been bullied by judges, bullied by opponents, even by clients. And I really know what that is like. And I know what it feels like to wake up tired in the morning and have to force myself through a day. You've got to go to court, you know, even if you're tired, you've got to do the absolute best you can for your client. And it is incredibly stressful. The one thing is you get the stress from all three sides. The one is from the judge, who in some cases is less than courteous and who can be quite irritable and a bully in certain cases. And you're not allowed to fight back. You need to handle that with diplomacy. Then there is the aggressive opponent. And then there is the client who is making huge demands. So obviously, when we are on our feet in court as advocates, we have all of those three pressures, and we have to stay true to our ethical and moral guidelines while still doing everything we can to win the case for our client. So that is extremely, extremely stressful. And, you know, there's something about South African lawyers. South African lawyers are known for writing letters with a poison pen. And I have had many experiences when I see a letter from a certain firm of attorneys, my heart just sinks, because it's just full of abuse and vitriol. And we can pretend that it doesn't upset us, but it does. It hurts. We have feelings, we have emotions. And the most difficult kind of abuse to deal with from a judge or an opponent or a client is passive aggression. When they're saying it with a smile on their face, their voices sound nice, but they're actually being incredibly abusive in a subtle way. That is the most crazy-making kind of abuse. And I have also learned strategies for how to deal with passive aggression.
That's amazing. And I actually want to add something to the three forces or sources of stress that you've mentioned. I think the fourth one that we definitely also need to speak about is the stress that we put on ourselves, because I think a lot of us are actually our own worst critics. Let's just be honest. I think we put a lot of stress on ourselves, especially when you are in a profession like law, where there is a lot of responsibility and there's a lot of things that are being expected of you. And I mean, we don't want to not live up to those expectations.
Yes, absolutely true. I relate to what you're saying. And because we are dealing with clients, the cases we're doing, even if it's not literally life and death, it can affect the rest of their lives, the outcome of the cases that we do. And I think, in fact, that it's a good thing that we place such high expectations on ourselves, because our clients deserve that. But the dark side of it is that we beat ourselves up if something went wrong.
100%. So tell us a bit more about how you specifically can help legal professionals.
Yes. So what I offer is support. One could also call it coaching, but it's primarily support. So if a legal professional person comes to see me, number one, that is everything that is said is confidential. And this is a big concern, of course, for legal practitioners, because you don't want your opponents or your clients or even judges to find out that what you said in a support session. So what happens in a support session is that the legal practitioner will come and see me either online or in a room, and will just share where they are currently, emotionally, physically, mentally, how their practice is going, and what the pressures are on them at that time, whether it's financial problems in a attorney's firm with either one superior or the people working for one, problems with an opponent, whatever it is. I will listen, and insofar as I have some personal experience to share that might be useful, I will do that, mainly to show that I get it, that I relate. I mean, I also many years was a candidate attorney. I was also an attorney in private practice before I became an advocate. And then I will share some suggestions based on the strategies that I have learned from bitter experience, how to deal with high conflict people, how to deal with a difficult client, how to deal with an opponent, sometimes an opponent who's not being honest. Unfortunately, that does happen. And also other things that cause stresses, such as writing fee invoices. Some attorneys and advocates find it very difficult to write and send out a fee invoice. Especially with us women, we feel this thing called imposter syndrome. We don't want to charge properly for our work. And having support from an outsider who is in the profession is very helpful in that regard. I can unpack some of the things that have made me always nervous to send out a fee invoice, and things that have changed to make me now charge what I said I was going to charge, you know. And so I think the first benefit for someone who comes to see me is that there's a safe space to pour out your heart and thoughts with someone who really has been there and who is still there. And the second benefit is to get some helpful suggestions to make one's life more manageable. I also emphasize self-care, which is something that I have learned to practice since I've recovered from my breakdown. those things make all the difference. Even on a really hectic, busy day, I will make time for self-care. It will include, it might include a 1-hour nap in the afternoon. It might include doing a little bit of gardening in between consultations. It might involve meditating before I go to bed, doing some art, doing something kind for myself. Because, so what I'm trying to convey to legal practitioners is that you are not a robot. You know, you are a person with needs. And yes, we must be stoical. We need to have tremendous courage. We need to work really hard. And I'm not downplaying that. Those are the things that make a good legal practitioner. However, even if you just look at yourself as if you were a car, you know, you take your car in for a service twice a year. If the if the tires are wearing thin, you replace the tires. You check, you listen to see what your car is telling you. If there's a rattle, you will have it attended to. And I'm saying that we should at least treat ourselves as well as we treat our cars. And my subtitle or slogan, if you like, is that support and self-care make us better lawyers.
100%, totally agree with you. You can't pour from an empty cup at all. Like it is unfortunately one of those things. But okay, so just to clarify, so after that one session, what happens then? Are there like follow-up sessions? How does it work?
So that is entirely up to the individual. There've been people who've come to me once and I said, wow, that's so amazing. And they go and implement that and they don't need to see me again. Other people come back, you know, so it's not as if you would sign up for a course. You come and see me as and when you feel the need to see me.
That's great. Okay, so you've mentioned self-care now. So I am sure that you know many lawyers, many attorneys, many advocates, many legal secretaries, many paralegals who say, no, but like I don't have time for self-care. I literally don't have time for self-care. I work 24/7. Like, what advice can you give them? Perhaps like one thing that they can try to implement.
Okay, the first thing is a reality check. If I say I don't have time to do that, and I'm not allowing my body and brain to rest, the time will come when my body and brain will force me by making me collapse. That's exactly what happened to me 10 years ago, because I pushed and pushed and pushed. So to say that I can't afford the time is actually not true, because if you keep going, you will not be able to keep going on a long-term basis. So even if you look at your life purely in terms of productivity and not even your own happiness and health, you will be more productive if you do give yourself that time. You know, and I know that there are people who work 12-hour days. Sometimes people work 16-hour days, and sometimes that is necessary. However, I would suggest that if you are working a 16-hour day on an ongoing basis, you need to relook at your priorities. If you're working for a boss that many hours a day, you are actually being abused. If you're working for yourself 16 hours a day, and we in private practice are our own worst taskmasters, then we need to look at ourselves, because I can promise you that it is not sustainable. You are not going to be able to work 16 hours a day until you are 65. That will not happen. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's not even that such a lot of time is needed for self-care. What it is for me is when I plan my day, I like to plan my day the evening before I go to bed, or otherwise first thing in the morning. And even if I've got a really strenuous day, if I know I'm going to have a nap from 3 o'clock till 4 o'clock this afternoon, then that actually keeps me going. Or if I say I'm going to take the dogs for a walk at 4 o'clock this afternoon, it's a lovely thing for me to look forward to, you know. And I find that by doing these daily little pockets of self-care, I'm more fresh and I actually produce better work. I make fewer mistakes, so I actually see it as my duty to my client to look after myself. It's not a nice to have, it's actually necessary.
Very necessary, very necessary. Like you said, like no person out there, no client out there wants an attorney who's tired and who is not looking after themselves, because if they are not looking at themselves, they're going to be tired. They are not going to give everything that they can to actually work on this case and give you the best outcome possible. So no, 100% there. So we've spoken about the attorneys now and how you can help legal professionals to deal with their mental health and to implement all of these wellness practices to ultimately do their jobs better. So now let's move to clients. How can you assist the clients of attorneys to actually deal with stressful periods of time? So let's say, for example, somebody's going through a divorce.
Yes. Okay, I'm glad you asked that question, because divorcing clients or any litigating parties go through tremendous stresses. We in the legal profession are doing court cases all the time, but the average individual litigant only ever has about one court case in their entire life, if that. So when it happens, it's a major traumatic life event. It is similar to undergoing open heart surgery. It's big. And I think that of necessity, that client's legal representatives simply cannot and should not be giving emotional support to the client. So before I start off with what my role is, I always advise my divorce clients to get the best kind of support they can afford. If they've got medical aid, I advise them to go and see a therapist once a week for the entire duration of the divorce. If they haven't got the money for that, I encourage them to get other kinds of support. For example, to go to a church counselor or some kind of community support group. There's also SADAG, the South African Depression and Anxiety Support Group. There are resources available, and I think that if you are, especially if you're going through a divorce, but if you're going through any kind of litigation as an individual, it is very important to get emotional support. So the support that I offer to divorcing parties and litigating parties is not primarily emotional support, although that does come into it. I can coach a divorcing party, not telling them what they must say in court, but I can coach them based on my own experience of many years of litigation, how to deal with bullying, aggression, and passive aggression from the opponent. And this, of course, happens mainly in family law matters. We've all seen it, those of us who do family law. For example, there's economic abuse that is practiced by the party with a bigger means, usually the husband. There's also parental alienation that goes on a lot during the divorce. There are all sorts of intimidating WhatsApps that get sent by the one spouse to the other. Or I'll make sure that you walk out of this divorce with nothing, or I'm going to take the children and you'll never see them again. And those things are incredibly traumatic. And the problem with being a person going through a divorce is you're going through the most challenging time of your life. And yet that is exactly the time when you are called on to be mentally clear. If you're negotiating a settlement, you are negotiating the ground rules for the rest of your life, or certainly the rest of your financial and parenting life. And I think that without support, it is a task which is beyond most people getting divorced. So the other kind of coaching that I can do is how to deal with oneself or handle oneself in the witness box. And again, I'm not saying that I'll coach someone to tell a lie or what to do, but there are ways of being a good witness. There are ways of dealing with a passive aggressive cross-examiner. If the advocate who's cross-examining you is smiling and sounding friendly, but is actually twisting what you say and trying to put words in your mouth, I know how to deal with that because I've been in the profession for so many years and have done so many divorces. I think that is really an important thing. The other thing I'm going to say might be a little bit offensive, but it's not intended in that way at all to attorneys. There are times when a client has a problem with their own attorney or their own advocate and doesn't feel that their psychologist or psychiatrist would understand that problem because they haven't been there. So I would never give legal advice to such a client, but I could give suggestions on how to approach one's attorney or one's advocate with whom one is having the problem in a way that is both diplomatic, but also respecting oneself, because the relationship between the client and the attorney can be a difficult one, and it is extremely important. It really is. And I'm not saying that the attorneys with whom those problems are experienced are bad. It's not that at all. It's just that sometimes a client doesn't feel confident to directly broach something with their attorney.
Definitely.
The attorney might have given them advice and the client thinks, I don't feel comfortable with that, but they feel too overawed to say, listen, let's talk about this. So I can also be of assistance in that regard.
Even in terms of like clients not knowing what the attorneys actually charge for, but they're too,
Yes.
I don't want to say too scared, but like they're afraid of offending the attorney by asking, listen, can you send me a statement of what you actually like used my money for? Or definitely, yeah. Or for example, what was the other example I just thought of? Yeah, but point is, I think communication definitely is a very big issue, not only between clients and attorneys, but in general. Oh, that's the other thing. So I think I've heard a lot of people when basically all of these people who have attorneys or pro bono attorneys especially, they tend to feel like the attorney is not communicating with them, but they are too scared, or they just don't know how to ask the attorney for an update on their matter because they don't think that they are allowed to do that or anything like that. And I think that's where the service that you provide is so needed, because I think, like if the communication is dealt with, then the matter can flow easily.
Yes, absolutely. And there are ways that a client can make sure that their attorney accounts to them. I think a lot of the important things is what arrangements you make with your attorney at the very first consultation, and talk about these things. Not only what are your fees, but are you going to give me an update once a week? What must I do if I'm not happy with your advice or with what you're doing? Discuss the ground rules. Very important, because it can be a long relationship.
Especially with litigation matters. It is something that can last years. So yeah, it's very important to, from the beginning, start on a good foot.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Doris, tell us, where can our listeners reach you?
You can look at my website, serenelawyer.com. You could also follow me on LinkedIn, Doris Goodenough, and on Facebook, I have a group called Support Groups Serene Lawyer. You could also ask to join that. And you'll see on my website, there is my email address, dorisgoodenough@gmail.com. So please feel free to contact me and we can have a discussion to see if I can be of service to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. You've shared so much valuable information. And I really hope that the people who need to hear this and need to learn more on this topic will listen to this podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Danielle. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Justice in Heels podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it with your friends on social media and tag us. As this podcast has a legal element, just a quick disclaimer that all views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of the firms, companies, or brands that we are associated with. Until next time, goodbye.